"Will you kill my stepdad for me?" asked a 7-year-old boy as he walked into a biker clubhouse with 7 crumpled dollar bills. The entire room went dead silent. Jackson, the chapter president, was the first to move. He knelt down to the boy's level. "What's your name, son?" "Henry," the boy whispered. "Henry, where did you get these bruises?" "My stepdad beats me and my little sister when he drinks, but tonight was real bad." "Where does this stepdad live?" Jackson asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The house on Cedar Street, about 2 miles from here." Every biker knew that neighborhood. It was where domestic calls went unanswered, where screams were ignored, where even cops showed up too late. Corey headed for the door. "Let's go handle this right now." "Wait," Jackson commanded, but what he said next shocked everyone. "The boy asked us to kill someone for $7. Jackson stood up slowly. "That means this kid is so desperate, he walked 2 miles in the dark to find killers." The bikers exchanged dark looks. They all knew what this meant. "Cops won't help," Gabby said. "They never do in domestic cases until someone's dead." "Then we handle it our way," Jake suggested, reaching for his weapon. Henry's eyes went wide with fear and hope at the same time. Jackson made a decision that would change everything. "Call Barry." Barry wasn't a doctor. He was their member who used to be a paramedic before his discharge. He looked at Henry's injuries and his face went pale. "This kid has broken ribs," Barry announced. "Maybe internal bleeding, too." The room exploded with cursing and threats. These hardened criminals were ready for blood. Mark Baker had just signed his own death warrant. "Please help my mom," Henry begged. "He said he's going to kill her tonight." That's when they heard the sirens. Everyone tensed. Cops meant trouble for men with records, but the sirens passed by heading toward Cedar Street. Jackson's phone rang. He answered and his face went dark. "There's been a shooting at your address." Henry collapsed to his knees. "No, no, no, my mom." What happened next went against every rule the Bandidos had. "Everyone rides now," Jackson roared. 15 motorcycles roared to life in the parking lot. They broke every traffic law getting to that house. Henry rode with Jackson, holding on tight as they raced through the night. The neighborhood was surrounded by police cars and ambulances. The bikers pulled up in formation, ready for war. Several cops reached for their weapons when they saw the Bandidos patches. If you believe in standing up for the innocent, in choosing protection over violence, and in the power of unlikely heroes, pause right now. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to Biker Stories. Tell us where you're watching from, because this story will remind you that sometimes the most dangerous men become the best protectors, and that a child's desperate cry can awaken the conscience of 15 hardened criminals. Henry's small hand trembled as he held out the $7. The bills were wrinkled, some torn at the edges, like they'd been hidden and counted 100 times. Jackson took them slowly, studying the boy's face in the dim light of the clubhouse. Barry pushed through the crowd, his medical bag already in hand. "Let me see him." He knelt beside Henry, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he lifted the boy's shirt. The room went silent as the bruises came into view. Purple, yellow, green. A timeline of violence written across a child's skin. "Jesus Christ, beuri mutered." He pressed carefully along Henry's ribs and the boy winced. Broken ribs, at least 2. "See these marks on his wrists? Rope burns. Fresh ones." He turned Henry's arms over, revealing raw, red lines circling both wrists. "And these bruises on his neck? Someone's been choking this kid." Corey slammed his fist against the wall. "I'm gonna kill him." "Get in line," Jake growled. Jackson held up his hand for silence. He looked down at Henry, whose tears had started flowing again. "Son, I need you to tell me exactly what your stepdad said tonight." Henry's voice was barely a whisper. "He was drinking, more than usual. He started hitting my mom because dinner was cold. Then he grabbed me when I tried to stop him. The boy's whole body shook. He said he was tired of us. Said tonight he was gonna finish what he started. He locked me in the closet, but I climbed out the window. I had to get help. I had to. Where's your sister right now? With Mom. Elizabeth's only 5. She doesn't understand. She just cries and that makes him angrier. Jackson stood up, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth hurt. Every instinct screamed at him to ride out there right now and paint that house red. But he'd built the Bandidos on discipline, on staying smart, on avoiding police attention. This would bring every cop in the county down on them. He looked at the $7 in his hand. $7 from a kid who had nothing. $7 to buy a death sentence. $7 that somehow felt heavier than anything he'd ever carried. "We don't have time for this debate," Gabby said, reading his hesitation. "That woman and that little girl are in danger right now." Jackson made his decision. He walked to the bar and set the $7 down carefully, smoothing them flat. "Nobody touches these. This is why we ride tonight." He turned to face his crew. "Everybody mounts up. Now." "Boss, you know what this means," Gabby warned. "Cops will be all over us." "I don't care." Jackson's voice carried across the clubhouse like thunder. A 7-year-old boy just walked 2 miles through the dark to find monsters, because he thought only monsters could stop a monster. Well, tonight we're his monsters. The clubhouse erupted into action. 15 men grabbed jackets, checked weapons, and headed for the door. Engines roared to life in the parking lot, one after another, a symphony of power and rage. Jackson scooped Henry up. "You're riding with me, kid. In the truck. Gabby's gonna lead on her bike." He looked at the boy's terrified, hopeful face. "Whatever happens next, you did the right thing coming here. You understand? The right thing." Henry nodded against Jackson's chest. The convoy pulled out of the parking lot like an army mobilizing for war. Gabby's motorcycle led the way, her taillight cutting through the darkness. Jackson's truck followed close behind with Henry buckled in tight. And behind them, 14 more motorcycles thundered through the night, their engines drowning out everything else. Henry pressed his face against the window, watching the bikes. "Are you really gonna help my mom?" "Kid," Jackson said, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "We're gonna make sure your stepdad never touches any of you again." The sirens grew louder as they approached Cedar Street. Jackson's gut tightened. Red and blue lights painted the neighborhood in flashes of chaos. 3 police cruisers, an ambulance, and what looked like half the block standing in their yards watching. "No, no, no," Henry whispered from the passenger seat, his small hands pressed against the window. "Mom!" Gabby's motorcycle slowed as she approached the scene, her hand raised in a signal. The rest of the convoy pulled up behind Jackson's truck, engines rumbling like distant thunder. Neighbors turned to stare as 15 bikers dismounted, their patches visible even in the darkness. Jackson put the truck in park but kept his hand on Henry's shoulder. "Stay here for 1 minute. Let me see what's happening." He stepped out just as a paramedic wheeled a gurney toward the ambulance. A woman lay on it, her face swollen and bloody, her arm bent at an unnatural angle. Henry's mother. She was conscious, trying to sit up, calling out a name. "Elizabeth! Where's Elizabeth?" Jackson's blood ran cold. The 5-year-old. Then he saw the second gurney. A man Mark Baker had to be, was being loaded into another ambulance. He had a gunshot wound to the shoulder, blood soaking through the temporary bandage. But he was alive, and he was screaming, "I'm gonna kill that old man. I'm gonna kill all of you. This ain't over." Sheriff Christopher stood near the police line, talking to an elderly man in worn jeans and a flannel shirt. The old man held a pistol loosely at his side, his hands shaking but his face calm. A veteran's face. Jackson recognized that look. Someone who'd seen real war and knew exactly when to pull a trigger. Barry appeared at Jackson's side. "That's Bruno Lester." Lives next door. Vietnam Viet. 68 years old. He nodded toward the scene. Word is he heard the screaming and looked through the window. Saw Baker going at the woman with a baseball bat while the little girl watched. So he shot him. Through the window. One shot. Shoulder. Clean. Barry nodded with professional respect. Old man's still got it. Jackson watched as Bruno handed his pistol to Sheriff Christopher. Barrel first, safe and controlled. The old man's voice carried across the yard, steady despite the chaos. I heard her screaming for help, looked through my kitchen window and saw him swinging that bat at her head. The little girl was in the corner, crying. I gave him a warning, told him to stop. He raised the bat again. Bruno's jaw tightened. I did what needed doing. Corey walked up, his face dark with fury. Baker's still breathing. We can fix that. Stand down, Jackson ordered. His eyes scanned the scene. Where's the little girl? A small figure emerged from behind a police cruiser. Elizabeth, her face streaked with tears, a female officer kneeling beside her trying to calm her down. The moment she saw the bikers, her eyes went wide with fear. Jackson turned back to his truck and opened the door. Henry had already unbuckled himself and was trying to climb out. Is my mom okay? Where's Elizabeth? Your mom's alive. Your sister's safe. Jackson lifted the boy out. But I need you to stay calm. There's a lot of cops here and they're gonna have questions. Henry's eyes found his mother on the gurney. Mom! She turned her head, and despite the pain etched across her face, her expression shifted to pure relief. Henry? Oh God, Henry, you're safe. Then her eyes widened as she saw the bikers surrounding them. What? Ma'am, these men brought your son here, the paramedic said quickly, reading the situation. He's got injuries that need treatment too. Sheriff Christopher's head snapped up at the commotion. His eyes locked onto Jackson, then swept across the assembled bandidos. His hand moved closer to his weapon. Jackson, what are you and your crew doing here? Got a call about a domestic situation. Jackson kept his voice level, his hands visible. Thought we'd check it out. From who? Jackson nodded toward Henry. From him. Kid walked 2 miles in the dark to find help. The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he took in Henry's bruised face, the way the boy was clinging to Jackson's hand. Christopher had been in law enforcement 25 years. He could read a situation. He looked from the bikers to Bruno Lester to Mark Baker being loaded into the ambulance, still screaming threats. That man threatened to finish killing his family tonight, Jackson said quietly. That old man there stopped him. We're just here to make sure these kids stay safe. Christopher's jaw worked. You need to leave. This is a crime scene. We're not going anywhere, Gabby said, stepping forward. The other bikers moved with her, forming a loose semicircle around Henry's mother and the children. Arms crossed, faces hard as stone. Several with visible weapons on their belts. The message was clear. Nobody was moving these kids. Sheriff Christopher looked at the wall of leather and steel in front of him, then at Bruno Lester, then at the ambulance carrying Mark Baker away. He was doing the math, calculating odds he didn't like. Jaden stepped out of the child services van carrying a tablet and a leather folder. She was young, maybe late 20s, with the kind of determined expression that came from seeing too much tragedy too early in a career. She approached Sheriff Christopher first, flashing her credentials. I'm Jaden Mills, Child Protective Services. I received a call about minors in immediate danger. Her eyes swept across the scene, landing on Henry and Elizabeth. Are those the children? They are, Christopher said, his voice tired. But we've got a situation here. The situation is that those children cannot remain with a parent who failed to protect them from ongoing abuse. Jaden's voice was clinical, professional. She'd done this 100 times. I have emergency custody paperwork. They'll be placed in temporary foster care until... No. Henry's mother tried to sit up on the gurney, her broken arm cradled against her chest. The paramedic gently pushed her back down. "Please don't take my babies. I tried to protect them. I tried." "Ma'am, the injuries on your son indicate prolonged abuse. Multiple incidents over an extended period." Jaden's face softened slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. "I understand this is difficult, but state law is clear. The children need to be removed for their own safety." "Safety?" Jackson's voice cut through the night air like a blade. He stepped forward, and without a word, every single one of his crew moved with him. 15 bikers formed a semicircle around the gurney, around Henry's mother, around both children. Arms crossed, faces carved from stone. Several had visible weapons on their belts, legal, holstered, but unmistakable. The female officer near Elizabeth instinctively reached for her radio. 2 other deputies moved their hands toward their service weapons. "Easy." Sheriff Christopher held up both hands, trying to de-escalate before someone did something everyone would regret. "Jackson, you need to step back. Those kids aren't going anywhere." Jackson didn't move. Behind him, Barry, Corey, Jake, and the others stood like a wall of leather and steel. "Not tonight." Jaden's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing fear underneath. But she recovered quickly. "Sir, I don't know who you are, but interfering with child services is a felony. These children are in state custody as of right now. Try to take them." Corey's voice was cold. "See what happens." "Stand down, Corey," Jackson said without taking his eyes off the social worker. "Ms. Mills, let me explain something to you. That woman on that gurney, she's got a concussion, a broken arm, and bruises from her husband trying to beat her to death with a baseball bat. That 7-year-old boy walked 2 miles in the dark with broken ribs to find help because he knew if he didn't, his mother would be dead by morning. That little girl watched her stepfather try to murder her mother. And now you want to traumatize them more by ripping them away from the only parent who's ever protected them. The law! The law!" Gabby stepped forward, her voice calm and measured. She was the crew's legal expert, the one who'd kept them out of prison more times than Jackson could count. "The law says children can be placed with relatives or approved guardians in emergency situations. The law also says you have to consider the least restrictive alternative, taking these kids to a group home when there are other options. That's not protecting them. That's destroying them." Sheriff Christopher looked at Jackson, at the wall of bikers, at Jaden with her paperwork, at Henry clinging to his mother's gurney. He was doing math again. How many officers did he have on scene? 4. How many armed bikers? 15. What would happen if he tried to force this? Nothing good. "There's another issue," Christopher said quietly to Jaden. "The mother might be facing charges." "For what?" Jackson's voice dropped to a dangerous level. "Failure to protect. It's protocol when there's evidence of prolonged abuse." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. If she knew about the abuse and didn't report it, didn't leave, she's a victim. Barry exploded. "You're gonna arrest a woman for getting beat by her husband? It's not my call. It's how the system works." "Your system is broken," Jackson said flatly. Jaden looked at her paperwork, at the bikers, at Sheriff Christopher's exhausted face. She'd been a social worker long enough to know when to fight and when to find another way. "If we can find an approved emergency foster placement by morning, I can hold off on the group home. But it has to be someone vetted, licensed, and able to take both children immediately." "How long do we have?" Gabby asked. "Until 8 a.m. tomorrow." Jaden checked her watch. "That's 9 hours. Jackson pulled out his phone. "Then we've got 9 hours to fix this." Sheriff Christopher rubbed his face. "You're putting me in an impossible position." "No, Sheriff. We're keeping you from making a mistake you'd regret for the rest of your life." Jackson's eyes were hard. These kids stay with people who care about them, or they don't go anywhere at all. Your choice. The standoff stretched into silence, broken only by Elizabeth's quiet crying and the distant wail of Mark Baker's ambulance disappearing into the night. Jackson stepped away from the standoff and pulled out his phone. His crew held the line, a wall of leather and steel that nobody was crossing. He dialed a number he knew by heart. Jasmine, I need you. Bring your credentials. All of them. 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Henry and Elizabeth sat on the ambulance bumper, wrapped in blankets, their mother being treated inside. Jaden stood 15 feet away, paperwork clutched in her hands, looking between the bikers and Sheriff Christopher like she was calculating her odds. They weren't good. Barry had given both kids a quick examination. Henry's ribs were definitely broken. Elizabeth had bruises on her arms where Mark had grabbed her. Both were in shock, operating on pure adrenaline and fear. Then headlights cut through the darkness. A silver sedan pulled up and a woman stepped out, tall, confident, carrying a leather bag. Jasmine. Her scrubs were visible under her jacket, her hospital ID still clipped to her belt. Jackson met her halfway. Thank you for coming. You said kids needed help. She looked past him at Henry and Elizabeth. Her expression shifted from concern to controlled fury when she saw their injuries. Those are the children? Henry and Elizabeth. Mothers in the ambulance. Stepdad shot by the neighbor after he tried to kill her with a baseball bat. Jasmine walked straight to Jaden. I'm Jasmine Monroe. Registered nurse, 20 years trauma experience. Also a certified emergency foster parent through the state. She pulled documents from her bag, certifications, background checks, home inspections, all current. I can take immediate custody of both children if needed. Jaden flipped through the papers, her expression torn between relief and suspicion. This is highly irregular. So is a 7-year-old walking 2 miles in the dark with broken ribs to find help, Jasmine said calmly. So is a 5-year-old watching her mother almost get beaten to death. Regular stopped applying to this situation hours ago. Sheriff Christopher walked over, studying the documents over Jaden's shoulder. He looked at Jackson, then at Jasmine. You two are married. For 18 years, Jasmine confirmed. Which you already know, Christopher, since you were at our wedding. The sheriff's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. He turned to Jaden. She's legitimate. I know her. She's good people. Jaden looked at the bikers, at the children, at the paperwork. She was doing the math, same as everyone else tonight. Finally, she nodded. Until the mother is released from the hospital and evaluated. Temporary emergency placement. Agreed, Jasmine said. Henry looked up at Jackson, confused and scared. Are we going with her? Jackson knelt down to his level. This is my wife. She's going to take care of you and your sister until your mom gets better. You'll be safe. I promise. Will you be there? Every day. You're under Bandidos protection now, kid. That doesn't stop. Inside the ambulance, Henry's mother was sitting up, her arm in a temporary cast, her face cleaned of blood. When she saw Jasmine explaining the arrangement through the open doors, tears started flowing. Thank you, she whispered when Jasmine came to check on her. Thank you for saving them. Thank your son. He's the bravest kid I've ever met. Jasmine squeezed her good hand gently. We're going to keep them safe. And when you're released, we'll figure out the next steps together. Jackson walked across the yard to where Bruno Lester sat on his porch steps, still being questioned by a detective. The old man looked tired, his hands steady now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Mr. Lester. Jackson held out a business card. Marcus Webb, best criminal defense attorney in the state. His retainers already paid. He'll be calling you in the morning. Bruno took the card, studying it, then studying Jackson. Why? Because you did what we would have done, Jackson said quietly. You just did it legal. You saved that woman and her kids. That matters. Bruno's eyes glistened. I heard her screaming. I couldn't just. I know. Neither could we. Jackson held out his hand. Bruno shook it, his grip still strong despite his age. Thank you. 2 days later, Jackson's phone rang while he was checking on Henry and Elizabeth at his house. They were eating breakfast, looking more like kids and less like trauma victims. Elizabeth had even smiled that morning. It was Sheriff Christopher. You need to hear this. Baker made bail. Jackson's blood went cold. How? Brother put up his house. Baker's out. And he's already running his mouth. Posted on social media about unfinished business. Sent text messages to the mother's phone threatening to finish what he started. Jackson's jaw clenched. Where is he now? Legally, I can't tell you that. Unofficially, he's staying at the Riverside Motel. Room 12. Understood. Jackson hung up and looked at Henry, who was watching him with those two old eyes. The kid knew. He always knew. Is he out? Henry asked quietly. Jackson nodded. But he's not getting near you. I promise. Dinner at Jackson and Jasmine's home was quiet. Too quiet. Henry picked at his mashed potatoes while Elizabeth sat in Jasmine's lap, still clinging to her like a lifeline. Their mother was in the hospital overnight for observation, her broken arm set in a cast, her concussion being monitored. Jackson watched Henry from across the table. The kid had barely eaten, barely spoken since they'd left the scene hours ago. His small face was tight with worry, like he was carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders. Henry, Jasmine said gently, you need to eat something, sweetheart. I'm not hungry. Henry's voice was barely a whisper. Then he looked up at Jackson, his eyes suddenly urgent. Can I show you something? Something important. Jackson set down his fork. What is it, son? Henry climbed down from his chair and ran to the backpack the social worker had retrieved from his house. He dug through it and pulled out an old smartphone. The screen cracked, the case worn, but the power button still lit up when he pressed it. My real dad gave me this before he died. 3 years ago. Henry's hands shook as he unlocked it. Mark doesn't know I have it. I hid it in the wall behind my bed. Jackson felt his pulse quicken. What's on it, Henry? Everything. The boy's voice cracked. I recorded everything. He handed the phone to Jackson. The screen showed a video gallery. 17 videos, each one dated and time-stamped over the past 6 months. Jackson clicked on the first one. The footage was shaky, filmed from a low angle like it had been propped on a shelf or hidden behind something. But the audio was crystal clear. Mark Baker's voice, slurred with alcohol, screaming at Henry's mother. Then the sound of a fist hitting flesh. The woman crying out. Elizabeth's terrified sobs in the background. Jackson's jaw clenched. He clicked on the second video. This one showed Mark forcing Henry to kneel on uncooked rice. The boy's knees bleeding, tears streaming down his face while Mark stood over him with a belt. You'll learn respect, Mark's voice snarled on the video. You'll learn or I'll beat it into you. The third video showed Mark striking Elizabeth across the face when she spilled her juice. The little girl, no more than 4 years old in the footage, flew backward and hit the wall. Jasmine covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. Oh my God! Jackson didn't watch all 17. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough. He stood up, phone in hand, and walked to the kitchen. He pulled out his cell and dialed Sheriff Christopher. Christopher, it's Jackson. I need you and the DA at my house. Now. What's this about? Evidence. Video evidence. 17 videos of Mark Baker abusing those kids over 6 months. There was a long pause on the other end. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't touch that phone. The sheriff arrived with District Attorney Morrison 30 minutes later. They sat at Jackson's dining room table while Henry, with Jasmine's hand on his shoulder for support, explained how he'd recorded the videos. How he'd hidden the phone after each recording. How he'd been too afraid to show anyone because Mark had threatened to kill them all if they ever told. Morrison watched every video, all 17. His face grew darker with each one. When the last video ended, Mark threatening to finish this family once and for all, just hours before Henry ran to the clubhouse. Morrison looked at Christopher. "We've got him. Airtight." Christopher nodded, his expression grim. Multiple counts of child abuse, domestic violence, terroristic threats, assault with a deadly weapon. He counted on his fingers. "I'm seeing at least 37 separate criminal counts here." "His bail gets revoked immediately," Morrison said. "I'll file the motion tonight. And when we set new bail, it's going to be high enough that he never sees daylight again until trial." "How high?" Jackson asked. $2 million. Morrison's smile was cold. "There's no way an unemployed drunk with a record can make that. He'll rot in county jail until we put him away for 20 years. Henry looked up at Jackson, hope flickering in his bruised eyes. "Does that mean he can't hurt us anymore?" Jackson knelt down to the boy's level. "That means you just took down a monster, kid. You were brave enough to document the truth, and now that truth is going to put him away for a long, long time. My dad gave me this phone so I could call him if I needed help." Henry's voice broke. "But he died before I could. So I used it to help myself." Jasmine pulled both Henry and Elizabeth into a hug. "Your father would be so proud of you." Sheriff Christopher stood, the phone now secured in an evidence bag. "We'll need Henry's testimony eventually, but this video evidence is enough to keep Baker locked up. You did good, son." As the sheriff and DA left, Jackson stood on his porch watching their taillights disappear. Gabby pulled up on her motorcycle a moment later. "Baker's brothers just rolled into town," she said. "Daniel and 2 others. They're staying at the Sunset Motel." Jackson's expression hardened. "Then it's time we paid them a visit." The sirens grew louder as they approached Cedar Street. Jackson's gut tightened. Red and blue lights painted the neighborhood in flashes of chaos. 3 police cruisers, an ambulance, and what looked like half the block standing in their yards watching. "No, no, no," Henry whispered from the passenger seat, his small hands pressed against the window. "Mom!" Gabby's motorcycle slowed as she approached the scene, her hand raised in a signal. The rest of the convoy pulled up behind Jackson's truck, engines rumbling like distant thunder. Neighbors turned to stare as 15 bikers dismounted, their patches visible even in the darkness. Jackson put the truck in park but kept his hand on Henry's shoulder. "Stay here for 1 minute. Let me see what's happening." He stepped out just as a paramedic wheeled a gurney toward the ambulance. A woman lay on it, her face swollen and bloody, her arm bent at an unnatural angle. Henry's mother. She was conscious, trying to sit up, calling out a name. "Elizabeth! Where's Elizabeth?" Jackson's blood ran cold. The 5-year-old. Then he saw the second gurney. A man Mark Baker had to be, was being loaded into another ambulance. He had a gunshot wound to the shoulder, blood soaking through the temporary bandage. But he was alive, and he was screaming, "I'm gonna kill that old man. I'm gonna kill all of you. This ain't over." Sheriff Christopher stood near the police line, talking to an elderly man in worn jeans and a flannel shirt. The old man held a pistol loosely at his side, his hands shaking but his face calm. A veteran's face. Jackson recognized that look. Someone who'd seen real war and knew exactly when to pull a trigger. Barry appeared at Jackson's side. "That's Bruno Lester. Lives next door. Vietnam Viet. 68 years old." He nodded toward the scene. Word is he heard the screaming and looked through the window. Saw Baker going at the woman with a baseball bat while the little girl watched. So he shot him. Through the window. 1 shot. Shoulder. Clean. Barry nodded with professional respect. Old man's still got it. Jackson watched as Bruno handed his pistol to Sheriff Christopher. Barrel first, safe and controlled. The old man's voice carried across the yard, steady despite the chaos. "I heard her screaming for help. looked through my kitchen window and saw him swinging that bat at her head. The little girl was in the corner, crying. I gave him a warning, told him to stop. He raised the bat again. Bruno's jaw tightened. I did what needed doing. Corey walked up, his face dark with fury. Baker's still breathing. We can fix that. Stand down, Jackson ordered. His eyes scanned the scene. Where's the little girl? A small figure emerged from behind a police cruiser. Elizabeth, her face streaked with tears, a female officer kneeling beside her trying to calm her down. The moment she saw the bikers, her eyes went wide with fear. Jackson turned back to his truck and opened the door. Henry had already unbuckled himself and was trying to climb out. Is my mom okay? Where's Elizabeth? Your mom's alive. Your sister's safe. Jackson lifted the boy out. But I need you to stay calm. There's a lot of cops here and they're gonna have questions. Henry's eyes found his mother on the gurney. Mom! She turned her head, and despite the pain etched across her face, her expression shifted to pure relief. Henry? Oh God, Henry, you're safe. Then her eyes widened as she saw the bikers surrounding them. What? Ma'am, these men brought your son here, the paramedic said quickly, reading the situation. He's got injuries that need treatment too. Sheriff Christopher's head snapped up at the commotion. His eyes locked onto Jackson, then swept across the assembled bandidos. His hand moved closer to his weapon. Jackson, what are you and your crew doing here? Got a call about a domestic situation. Jackson kept his voice level, his hands visible. Thought we'd check it out. From who? Jackson nodded toward Henry. From him. Kid walked 2 miles in the dark to find help. The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he took in Henry's bruised face, the way the boy was clinging to Jackson's hand. Christopher had been in law enforcement 25 years. He could read a situation. He looked from the bikers to Bruno Lester to Mark Baker being loaded into the ambulance, still screaming threats. That man threatened to finish killing his family tonight, Jackson said quietly. That old man there stopped him. We're just here to make sure these kids stay safe. Christopher's jaw worked. You need to leave. This is a crime scene. We're not going anywhere, Gabby said, stepping forward. The other bikers moved with her, forming a loose semicircle around Henry's mother and the children. Arms crossed, faces hard as stone. Several with visible weapons on their belts. The message was clear. Nobody was moving these kids. Sheriff Christopher looked at the wall of leather and steel in front of him, then at Bruno Lester, then at the ambulance carrying Mark Baker away. He was doing the math, calculating odds he didn't like. Daniel Baker rolled into town 3 days after his brother went back to jail. He drove a black pickup truck with 2 other men, both known dealers, both with violent reputations that stretched across 3 counties. They weren't here to talk. Old man shot my brother, Daniel said as they pulled into the shabby motel on the edge of town. We're gonna make him wish he hadn't. His associate, a rail-thin man named Tommy, nodded toward the glove compartment where 2 pistols sat wrapped in a grease-stained towel. What about the bikers? What about them? Daniel's jaw tightened. They ain't cops. They got no legal right to do nothing. We handle our business, we're gone by morning. They checked into the motel, room 117, and immediately began planning. Bruno Lester's address had been easy to find. Small towns didn't keep many secrets. The plan was simple. Wait until dark, catch the old man alone, make it look like a robbery gone wrong. But when they drove past Bruno's house just after sunset, Daniel slammed on the brakes so hard Tommy hit the dashboard. 15 motorcycles were parked in a perfect line along the curb. Bandidos patches gleaming even in the fading light. And sitting on Bruno's porch, calm as Sunday morning, were Jackson and Barry. They weren't hiding. They were waiting. Drive, Tommy said quietly. Just drive. Daniel's hands shook on the wheel as he pulled away. In his rearview mirror, he saw Jackson stand up and pull out his phone, making a call. They drove back to the motel in silence. Daniel's mind raced. This was supposed to be easy. Get revenge, get out. But those bikers weren't playing games. They'd known he was coming. They'd been ready. Maybe we just leave. The third man, Rico, suggested. Cut our losses. We don't run from nobody, Daniel snapped. But his voice cracked. He'd heard stories about the Bandidos. Things that happened to people who crossed them. Things that never made it into police reports. They pulled into the motel parking lot just as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The lot was nearly empty. Just their truck, a beaten-up sedan, and a rusted RV that looked abandoned. Daniel stepped out of the truck and froze. Jake leaned against the motel office wall, arms crossed. Corey sat on his motorcycle near the entrance, engine off but keys in hand. Gabby stood by their room door, 117, like she'd been waiting for them specifically, and spread across the parking lot, casual but deliberate, were 12 more bikers. Evening, gentlemen. Jackson's voice came from behind them. He'd been sitting in the shadows near the ice machine. He stood now, walking slowly toward them, hands in his pockets. Non treatening. But the message was clear. They were surrounded. Daniel's hand moved toward his waistband where his pistol sat tucked. Corey's head turned slightly, tracking the movement. 3 other bikers shifted their positions. Nobody drew weapons. Nobody had to. I wouldn't, Jackson said softly. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to have a conversation. We got nothing to say to you, Daniel said, trying to sound tough. Came out shaky. Then listen. Jackson stopped 10 feet away. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his face. Mark broke children's bones. He terrorized a family. He threatened to murder a woman and her kids. That's why he's in jail. That's why Bruno Lester put a bullet in his shoulder. That's why we're here. Tommy and Rico edged closer to their truck. Gabby stepped in front of it, blocking the driver's door. We know what you do for a living, Jackson continued. We know you run meth through 3 counties. We know your suppliers, your buyers, your drop points. He let that sink in. We also know your competitors. And we know every sheriff's department that would love to know where you operate. Daniel's face went pale. You threatening us? No. Jackson's voice was calm, almost gentle. I'm giving you a choice. You can leave this county by sunrise, and we forget you were ever here. Or you can stay, try something stupid, and we make one phone call. By tomorrow afternoon, every rival dealer and every cop within 200 miles will know exactly where to find you. The silence stretched. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Car lights swept past on the highway. If anything happens to that family ever again, Jackson said, his voice dropping lower. If Bruno Lester stubs his toe, if those kids get a mean look from a stranger, we will assume it was you, and we will respond accordingly. Are we clear? Daniel looked at his associates. Tommy wouldn't meet his eyes. Rico was already backing toward the truck. We're clear, Daniel said finally. Jackson nodded once. Sunrise. I suggest you start packing. By 11:30 that night, room 117 was empty. The black pickup was gone. Daniel Baker and his crew vanished like smoke, and nobody in town ever saw them again. The story closes with a powerful reframing of heroism. Sometimes the most dangerous men make the best protectors, because they understand violence intimately and know exactly when not to use it. The Bandidos didn't need to fire a single shot to defeat Mark Baker and his allies. They just needed to show up and refuse to leave. Jackson keeps those 7 crumpled dollar bills in a frame on the wall of the clubhouse. A permanent reminder that even the darkest souls can choose to be light for someone who desperately needs it. Henry, Elizabeth, and their mother are safe now, protected not by the law or the system, but by 15 bikers who decided that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's 15 dangerous strangers who choose to stand between you and the monsters. If the story moved you, If it reminded you that heroes don't always wear badges and that sometimes the people society fears most are exactly who we need when everything falls apart, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and whether you believe in second chances, in redemption, in the idea that even the darkest souls can choose to stand in the light for someone who desperately needs it. This is Biker Stories, where we share tales of unlikely heroes, unexpected courage, and the thin line between justice and vengeance. Because sometimes the most dangerous men make the best protectors. They understand violence intimately, and they know exactly when not to use it. Subscribe now. Hit that notification bell. And remember, family isn't who you're born to. Family is who shows up when you need them most.